This week on The Inside Story, global heat and Flashpoint, Ukraine. Planet Earth just finished the hottest month in human history.
The era of global warming has ended, the era of global boiling has arrived.
How bad was July, and are we doomed to repeat it? Plus, in Ukraine, the battle against climate change spills into its war with Russia. Now, on The Inside Story, global heat and Flashpoint, Ukraine.
Welcome to The Inside Story. I'm Elizabeth Lee, VOA correspondent, and today I'm reporting outside of our studio in Washington, D.C. Extreme weather conditions have left millions of Americans and communities devastated, with heat advisories and flood warnings affecting nearly 200 million people across the United States. But it's not just the U.S. The world is grappling with the devastating impacts of climate change, with some regions underwater, others on fire, and long-lasting droughts, leaving areas parched. Climate scientists warn these extreme events may become the new norm. As we address climate change in Ukraine, the ongoing war with Russia adds another layer of challenge as heavy rains delay their spring offensive and disruptions in fuel supplies hinder relief efforts in the heat. Stay tuned for these and more. Climate scientists warn these extreme conditions could be the new normal. VOA's Arash Arabasadi starts us off with this story.
If you were alive on planet Earth during the month of July, congratulations. You witnessed the hottest month ever recorded in human history, perhaps the hottest in 120,000 years. Few places seemed safe from our rapidly changing climate. The Italian island of Sicily scorched by wildfires and shrouded in smoke as drivers rushed to safety, while passengers in Beijing weren't as lucky, washed away in their cars along roads turned rivers in the Chinese capital, where record rainfall drenched the city of nearly 22 million people. Forecasters say the deadly rainfall may only get worse when another typhoon strikes, the sixth this year. Turkish firefighters joined emergency efforts to contain deadly wildfires in Greece, a country that endured 3 consecutive heat waves with temperatures around 40 degrees Celsius. Euronews reporting the European Commission and the Joint Research Center saying 135,000 hectares burned in Greece, Italy, Algeria, and Tunisia in just 12 days. Turkish firefighters had wildfires of their own to put out at home. More than 600 firefighters backed by 40 aircraft did battle in an area known as the Turkish Riviera, a seaside resort that annually plays host to thousands of tourists. In Syria, following an earthquake in February that killed at least 5,000 people, wildfires have raged amid high temperatures plaguing the Mediterranean. The state news agency there said nationwide temperatures were 6 degrees Celsius higher than average. Coupled with erratic rainfall, Syria's wheat crop in recent years dropped some 75%. Monsoon rains drenched Pakistan, and parts of its commercial capital Karachi suffered major flooding. Large swaths of Pakistan were underwater last year, too, as part of a lethal phenomenon of monsoons and melting glaciers. At least 1,700 people died, while crops and infrastructure suffered as well. Meanwhile, neighboring India's weather agency issued alerts for heavy to very heavy rainfall in multiple regions amid a monsoon season that's already dropped 2% more rainfall this year than normal. More than 100 people have died in the rains, with around 1,600 hectares of land sunk in floodplains. Scientists say monsoons, accompanying landslides, and flash floods are becoming more extreme and erratic because of climate change. A different picture from what's happening in the capital of Afghanistan. The global heat wave and severe drought force residents of Kabul to pay high prices and travel long distances to get water. One resident told the Associated Press he spends half of his salary on rent and the rest on water. The United States has also been dealing with extreme heat as the sun scorches the streets of Phoenix, Arizona in the country's southwest. For nearly all the month of July, temperatures had been at or above 43 degrees Celsius. Here, in a tent city known as the Zone, are the people most likely to die in the extreme desert heat, the homeless, forcing the city of Phoenix to deploy creative measures to keep people cool.
The city's been sending one of the Valley Metro extended buses out here. It sits out here for a couple hours so we can sit in them and stay cool, not sitting in the sun. That's different. I never experienced that before. It's a nice way to stay cool.
Experts say it's possible to cool urban heat by reimagining building surfaces, like in Los Angeles, where recent construction features light colors that absorb less sunlight and in turn lower the temperature. Phoenix or Los Angeles are far from alone in suffering sweltering heat this year. The National Weather Service reporting a full 60% of people living in the U.S. were under heat advisories or flood warnings as of late July. CNN reporting more than 2,300 heat records from coast to coast in the U.S., with a break unlikely anytime soon, as forecasters say extreme heat here could continue into August. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says scientists confirmed what we've been talking about so far. July was the hottest month in recorded history. Guterres says we've blazed into a new era. Here he is in his own words.
The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived. Humanity is in the hot seat. Today, the World Meteorological Organization and the European Commission's Copernicus Climate Change Service are releasing official data that confirms that July 2023 is set to be the hottest month ever recorded in human history. The consequences are clear and they are tragic. Children swept away by monsoon rains, families running from the flames, workers collapsing in scorching heat. For vast parts of North America, Asia, Africa, and Europe, it's a cruel summer. For the entire planet, it is a disaster. And for scientists, it is unequivocal. Humans are to blame. The air is unbreathable, the heat is unbearable, and the level of fossil fuel profits and climate inaction is unacceptable. We have seen some progress, a robust rollout of renewables, some positive steps from sectors such as shipping, but none of this is going far enough or fast enough. All countries must respond and protect their people from the searing heat, fatal floods, storms, droughts, and raging fires that result. Those countries on the front lines who have done the least to cause the crisis and have the least resources to deal with it must have the support they need to do so. The evidence is everywhere. Humanity has unleashed destruction. This must not inspire despair, but action. We can still stop the worst, but to do so, we must turn a year of burning heat into a year of burning ambition and accelerate climate action now.
Near record, likely tying a record today. Yeah, again tomorrow.
We started at 82 this morning. That is a new record for the warmest low temperature.
All the way through the evening hours, your air conditioning is going to be running in that high category.
Record-breaking heat in Texas is driving record-breaking energy demand as Texans crank up the air conditioning to stay cool. But in the top oil and gas producing state in the United States, it's solar power that's beating the heat. That's good news for climate change. The state is meeting its growing demand for electricity without burning more fossil fuels, which would make things worse. Every summer day in Texas, temperatures and electricity demand rise with the sun. At 6 p.m. on July 18th, with temperatures topping 38 degrees Celsius across the state, demand hit a new record. Power plants fueled by natural gas had been ramping up all day to keep air conditioners running. By 6 p.m., they generated about half of the state's power. But solar had been coming on strong too, as the sun rose and the heat climbed. It reached 13% of the power supply when the state needed it the most. That may not sound like much, but it's a huge jump from just 4 years ago. On the hottest day of 2019, solar was just 2% of the Texas power supply. Solar's growth has been explosive in the state. Generating capacity is nearly 10 times what it was just 5 years ago, and it's set to more than double in just the next 2 years. That's on top of the state's nation-leading supply of renewable wind power. Wind energy is second only to natural gas in electricity generation in Texas. Solar still ranks behind coal and nuclear in the state's power mix, but it's growing while coal is shrinking and nuclear is flat. Even natural gas is flat in the state that produces the most of it. Electricity demand is growing in Texas. It's not just because temperatures are rising, the population is growing too. Since fossil fuel generation is basically flat, it's renewables that are covering that growth. That's pretty remarkable in a state that got rich from oil and gas.
Heavy rains reportedly caused a delay in Ukraine's spring offensive. While the country has been spared from extreme heat, unlike other parts of the world, the ongoing war with Russia has created additional difficulties. Fuel supplies, critical for providing relief, have been disrupted. Additionally, the war is now posing a threat to the global food supply chain. Our Eastern Europe Bureau Chief Miroslava Gongadze has more on this alarming situation.
Lukasz Pergol, a farmer in Zialdowo, Poland, has begun harvesting 100 acres of wheat and other crops. He is keeping business afloat, especially since the European Union in April allowed Poland and 4 of its neighbors to ban domestic sales of Ukrainian wheat, maize, rapeseed, and sunflower seeds to protect their own farmers, who were hard hit by the wartime flood of Ukrainian shipments. Agricultural ministers from the 5 EU states are pushing the European Commission to extend the ban past its September 15 deadline, but will still allow Ukrainian shipments to pass through their countries to other parts of the world. Pergol sees a good reason for the ban.
If grain from Ukraine only transited through us, it would not be a problem. But many intermediary purchasing entities took advantage of the war turmoil and the passivity of the Polish government, bought this grain, and used it in our feed factories.
Rising fertilizer and fuel costs have negatively affected Polish farmers, making it difficult for them to compete with Ukraine's agricultural powerhouse. And Russia's bombing of Ukrainian ports, as well as potential Black Sea blockade, are restricting Ukraine's export, creating a problem for farmers inside and outside Ukraine, and threatening the global food supply chain. Roman Slaston, Director General of the Ukrainian Agrarian Business Association, Agribusiness Club in Kyiv, says finding alternative routes via Poland and other countries is key to getting the grain out. Prior to ban, Ukraine could ship more than 1 million tons of grain each month, but the ban in April changed that.
Transit, actually, over the last few months after the decision and ban, didn't recover to the volumes which we had until April. At least twice, and in some days we can say even triple the downsize of the transit.
He says some Polish transit routes used before the ban are now close to Ukrainian crops, and the capacity of the ports is limited. Marcin Nowacki, Vice President of the Polish Union of Entrepreneurs and Employers, points out the need for new procedures, business models for transit, and enhanced infrastructure to prevent the diversion of Ukrainian grain into domestic markets.
We need a grain storage somewhere next to Gdańsk Harbor. This is something needed right now. If we want to make it easier, if we want to really enhance the capacity of transit, the dedicated grain facility for storage is needed.
Slaston says Ukraine exported more than 68 million tons of grain in the past year, an amount sufficient to feed 400 million people worldwide annually. He predicts Export this year will drop to 60 tons.
From 400 million people in the world, which we were feeding with our grain, we will be able to provide food only for 200. So who will produce for the rest?
Ukrainian producers warn that unless the problem of delivering Ukrainian grain to the world is not addressed soon, global food security will be threatened further. Miroslava Gongadze, VOA News, Warsaw, Poland.
Let's shift our focus to the Ukrainian farmland for a moment. Despite Russia withdrawing from the Black Sea grain deal, the port city of Odessa has been subjected to relentless shelling. This poses a new challenge for Ukrainian farmers who are striving to sustain their livelihood in the midst of wartime. Anna Koskochenko shares the story of a German agriculture consultant who made the decision to remain in Ukraine throughout the war and the invaluable assistance he has provided to his adopted country.
German native Dietrich Treis has been an independent consultant on farming and agriculture in Ukraine since 2005. When Russia invaded Ukraine, he decided to stay in the country despite the risks and has been supporting Ukraine's armed forces since day one of the war. In late June, his company organized a charity event to support Ukraine's military.
Money went into the project for buying drones, and I personally contributed.
Treis grew up at a farm in Bavaria. He came to Ukraine in 1999 for the first time and fell in love with the country. In 2017, he started working with a German-Ukrainian agricultural project of the Federal Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Consumer Protection. He has been used to transporting his grain to the world via the Black Sea. But Russian shelling is making it difficult, and transporting grain over land is more expensive.
If it be a longer time, if it will be port facility destroyed, then I think we mean all, not our farm, but all Ukrainian farmers will be in a very big problem.
Treis calculates that his company could lose about $1 million solely because of the switch to land transportation. He also worries Russian forces might destroy the grain that is sitting in ports.
Next year, this time, actually, I have to have empty stores to store my new harvest. Store for 2 years without losing or spoiling the grain, but I don't have the storage for the next harvest.
Russia's leaving the grain deal affected the global market, but he says poor countries are feeling the biggest impact.
The poor people in the world will suffer for a long time.
Despite the war and the unpredictability of the export situation, Treis says he has no plans to leave Ukraine. For Anna Kostyuchenko in Kiev region, Ukraine, Anna Rice, VOA News.
As Russia's war in Ukraine grinds on, many Ukrainians are so exhausted that they're ignoring air raid sirens, something experts call alert fatigue. U.S. scientists say it is contributing to the civilian casualty rate. Maria Ulyanovska has the story narrated by Anna Rice.
Can you say why we're taking the metro?
Because there are rockets flying.
Natalia Fedorchenko and her family live in a house just outside Kiev. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Fedorchenko, along with her husband and son, evacuated to the western part of the country. But they eventually returned to Kiev and tried to adapt to life during wartime.
We have a routine. We get up, eat breakfast, brush our teeth, shower, go to work, and take the metro when we hear an air raid siren. It just becomes part of your everyday life.
This has been the norm for many Ukrainians since the war began 17 months ago. Volunteers with the Air Alarms in UA, a website that collects and analyzes air raid data, say that from the start of the war to the end of May, Ukrainians heard over 25,000 air raid sirens, roughly 1,680 per month across the country.
The closer you are to the Russian and Belarusian borders, the more air raid sirens you hear, and the longer each of them lasts.
Experts have researched the effectiveness of this alarm system. Having analyzed anonymous data from Ukraine cell phones, they could track how locals respond to air raid sirens.
Over time, what we found was that people were going less to the shelters. They were kind of getting used to a daily reality of being bombed and being attacked, which potentially resulted in 10 to 15% increase in civilian casualties.
The so-called alert fatigue started affecting Ukrainians about 3 to 4 months after the start of the war, say researchers. More people like Natalia Fedorchenko started staying at home, choosing a relatively safe position between two walls instead of going to the shelter.
We decided that during missile attacks we take the metro. When the Shaheds are flying, we just rely on our air defense forces and hope that if some wreckage hits the house, the walls will protect us. So we take our son here, lie down and wait for the explosions to stop.
The charity United Help Ukraine has purchased toys, games and school supplies for children forced to hide in shelters. Washington-based employees of the consulting firm Deloitte volunteered to pack the gifts for delivery to Ukraine. For Tatiana Gagan and many others here, the war is personal.
I have a 15-month-old kid, and I think about Ukrainian children a lot. We can do a little, but we'll know, even sitting at a shelter, they'll be able to get distracted.
According to data from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, at least 7,000 civilians in Ukraine have been killed since the beginning of the war. For Maria Ulyanovska in Kiev, Ukraine, Anna Rice, VOA News.
Amidst the intense conflict between Russian and Ukrainian military forces, there are some brave individuals in Ukraine's urban areas who have made the decision to stay in these battle zones in order to rescue their beloved pets. VOA's Anna Kosachenko brings us more on a group of volunteers from Kharkiv who are at the forefront of these challenging evacuation efforts. However, we do want to caution our viewers that the video footage contains scenes of injured animals which may be distressing to some.
These 4 puppies were saved from the town of Chasiv Yar in eastern Ukraine, located some 12 kilometers from recent fighting. Ruslan Horbal is one of the volunteers who is helping evacuate pets from the conflict zone.
When the war started, it became clear that I can be most useful here, helping evacuate pets from the combat zone.
This part of the Donbas region isn't occupied by Russian forces at this point. Volunteers, including Yarina Vintonyuk, are going to about 20 houses a day to rescue pets.
People are giving their pets away to get a better chance to evacuate themselves. But some are staying in the heavily shelled areas just because they don't want to leave their pets behind.
Injured animals are being taken to a vet clinic opened in Kharkiv in the fall of 2022.
It's safe because it's in the basement, it's well protected. Initially, we bought very basic equipment for these surgeries and treatment to be conducted, and it was basically movable. And they had it in one location, then in another, just in an apartment, in like a kitchen. So eventually, once they found funding to actually get the place, they were able to establish there. So we've done more of like the medical side, and German PETA, I believe, was the organization that paid for the location.
Vytautas Židonis is a Lithuanian surgeon. He has been working in this clinic since December 2022. He intentionally moved to Ukraine after Russia invaded to help in the best way he could.
Best motivations, it was Russians. They did already a lot of problems in my homeland, in Lithuania. We were occupied for a long time,
Since the start of the war, rescuers have evacuated over 10,000 animals from the dangerous areas of Ukraine. Anna Kostychenko for VOA News, Kharkiv and Donetsk regions, Ukraine.
Thanks for watching. Stay up to date with all the news at voanews.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at VOA News. Follow me on Twitter at ELeeTV1. Catch up on past episodes at our free streaming service, VOA Plus. On behalf of everyone working behind the scenes, I'm Elizabeth Lee. See you next week on The Inside Story.